Hey y'all, so there wasn't a Bassmaster Elite Series or FLW Tour event this last weekend, so I decided to break down the first FLW Tour event from last season on Lake Guntersville. And Mark Rose won this tournament with a 4-day total of 79 pounds 11 ounces. Let's see how he did it. So the venue for the first FLW Tour stop of 2017 was Lake Guntersville in Guntersville, Alabama. And this is one of the lakes in the Tennessee River, and the tournament took place between February 2nd and February 5th of 2017. The air temperatures during this tournament week were between 45 and 55 degrees, and I'm going to estimate that the water temperatures were between 46 and 50 degrees. Lake Guntersville is a really diverse fishery, and there's a lot of different types of structure and cover for the bass to get around, and so the patterns were kind of all over the place over the 4 days of the tournament. On the first day of the tournament, the biggest bag was brought in by Kendrick. And he was fishing one of the main bridges on Lake Guntersville, and Guntersville is pretty famous for its bridge fishing in the wintertime. And he caught his fish on a 5.5-inch paddle tail swim bait with either a 3/4 ounce or a 1/2 ounce swim bait head, and he was just casting that swim bait down the bridge pilings, trying to target suspended bass. And on day one, he caught 25 pounds on this pattern, but after the first day, this pattern kind of died and he started to fall down the leaderboard. As the tournament progressed, there were really two main patterns that developed. The first was fishing the main river on Lake Guntersville. One of the most productive types of structure on the main river were these main river bars, and that's where Alex Davis, the third place finisher, was fishing this week. Here's a look at one of the main river bars that Alex was fishing this week using Navionics, and if we zoom in you can see that the main river channel runs right up against some shallow water, and that shallow water is the main river bar. And on top of this river bar, there's some grass and some shell beds and about 5 to 8 feet of water, and there's also some indentations in this river bar, and these create current seams. As the current starts flowing down the Tennessee River here, the current actually pushes around these little indentations and it creates a no current area. And in the wintertime, bass like to sit in these areas where there's no current because it's easier for them to ambush bait that gets blown by. And Alex was targeting these spots with either a lipless crankbait, a deep diving jerkbait, or a football jig, just depending on the type of cover that was down there. Another one of the main patterns that was used by the top 10 this week was fishing the backwaters on Lake Guntersville. Let me show you a couple of the spots they were fishing. First up is a spot that the 4th place finisher Scott Suggs was fishing. Here's a look at the spot using Navionics, and if we zoom in we can actually see that there's some creek channels that converge right in the middle of this bay. And just off to the left there's a nice grassy point, and this point's in about 6 to 10 feet of water, and the fish were using this spot as a staging area in the pre-spawn before they move up to the banks. And Scott was just sitting off here in the channel casting up onto this grassy point with a 1/2 ounce rattle trap, and those fish were sitting right on that edge of that point close to the creek channel, and he was working that bait really slow down there and catching some good fish. Another angler in the top 10, Shin Fukai, who finished in 5th place, was fishing a similar area down the lake. And if we scroll back this aerial footage to the summertime, we can see exactly where the grass is growing in this bay. You can see that there's actually a little ditch in the grass right off this point, and using Navionics we can also see that there's a nice creek channel that runs in here. And so, just like the spot that Scott Suggs was fishing, there's an area where two creek channels meet. And these fish were sitting right on this grassy point where the creek channel and that smaller little ditch meet up. And Shin was catching those fish on a red rattle trap, fishing it slow through that grass just like Scott was.
See? Look, he's very hard-baited, right?
And to explain how Shin and Scott were catching their fish on this rattle trap in the grass, I made this little illustration, and basically what they were doing was fishing a rattle trap really slow in 5 to 7 feet of water over the top of submerged grass. And what they would do is they would cast that bait out there and actually let it get hung in the grass, and then they'd rip it free and let it get hung in the grass again and rip it free. And this would create a reaction strike, and any fish that were sitting down in the grass would come up out of the grass and grab that bait as it was pulled free. So that pretty much covers the patterns used by the top 10 this week on Guntersville, and there are a few other patterns that were working, like fishing boat docks and some other random stuff, but the majority of the top 10 were focused on that eelgrass. And the only real outlier was the winner of the tournament, Mark Rose. He spent most of his tournament fishing rock, and it really helped him separate himself from the field. let's take a look at some of the spots that he was fishing and see why they were special. So first up is Mark's morning spot. He was actually fishing the same bridge that Jay Kendrick caught his 25-pound bag on the first day of the tournament, but instead of fishing the bridge pilings, he was actually fishing the riprap down the bridge. And what he found is that there was some really good chunk rock down this bank, and there were huge schools of gizzard shad pushed up against these rocks. And he thinks that some of the fish that Jay was catching earlier in the week actually moved off of the bridge because of the pressure and moved down this riprap bank. And he would be catching these fish on a flat side crankbait, fishing parallel to these rocks, fishing it really slow. And he was catching some really big bass in the first hour of the morning on this spot. And then after that morning bite died on that riprap, he would move into the back of one of the main creeks on the south end of Lake Guntersville. And this was a really special spot for Mark this week. He said he never saw a boat within a mile of this spot the entire tournament. And if you look at Navionics, it doesn't actually look that good. It doesn't look like there's a lot of deep water around this point, but as you can see from this picture, there's some really good chunk rock down this bank. And Mark was catching fish on that flat side crankbait again, fishing in those rocks really slow, kind of like he was doing on that riprap. And there was a big group of pre-spawn largemouth that were pulling up on this point every day. So here's a look at the spot using Navionics, and again, it doesn't look like that great of a spot if you just look at the topographic map. Normally in early February when the water temperatures are in the 40s, you want to find areas with deep water close by, and it doesn't really look like there is if you just look at the topographic map, and that's probably why none of the other pros check this spot out in practice. But if you take a look at the spot on Google Earth, you can actually see that there's some nice chunk rock off this point, and if you take a closer look at that Navionics map as well, you can see there's a little creek channel that runs into this pocket on the left. And there also has to be a creek channel feeding this little pocket on the right, even if it's really shallow. So this means that we actually have an intersection of creek channels right off the end of this point. And if we look at this spot now, it looks like an ideal spot for fish to stage in the pre-spawn. And that school of fish was sitting right off the end of this point in those rocks, and there was also some eelgrass around the corner that the fish were staging on, as well as some laydown logs. So this is a great pre-spawn location that a lot of pros overlooked, but Mark actually checked out in practice, and he's glad he did. And then as far as how Mark was fishing the spot, the majority of his fish came on a flat side crankbait, fished really slow down this bank, and he would target this rocky point and make casts at a 45-degree angle to the spot, and he would just make repeated casts right across this point with that flat side crankbait and reel it back really slow. And he tried to hit the spot from multiple angles and tried to position his boat so that he could make a lot of different casts off this point. And finally, let's take a look at the bait that Mark was throwing this week. He was fishing a Strike King Custom Shop flat shad crankbait, and this bait was actually discontinued 5 or 6 years ago, and it's a flat-sided balsa wood crankbait that dives 5 to 8 feet deep. And he actually had the bait custom painted and put an extra layer of epoxy on the outside to give the bait a little bit extra weight so it's easier to cast. And these flat-side crankbaits are really good in the pre-spawn when the water temperatures are in the 40s because it has a tight wobble, and that really attracts those lethargic largemouth. And I actually used this bait 12 years ago to win a junior state championship in March on Morgan Point Lake in southern Arkansas, and I caught this 8-pounder on this crankbait. It was my personal best bass at the time, so this bait really works. They're a little bit hard to find, but if you can find one, try to get one and try it out on any shallow water muddy lakes in the early spring, and you're gonna catch some big bass. So that's pretty much it for my breakdown of the 2017 FLW Tour event on Lake Guntersville. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and learned something about how these pros were catching these pre-spawn bass in the Tennessee River. And if you want more information about this event, you can go to flwfishing.com and type in Lake Guntersville 2017, and you'll get a whole list of articles about this tournament, and it goes really in depth about all the patterns the pros were fishing. And you can also find some good articles on bassfan.com as well. So if you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe down below, and share it out with a friend if you think they would find it interesting, and also let me know what you think about this new series. Again, this is a brand new series I'm starting, and I'm trying to get as much input as I can to know if you guys want me to keep doing it. So again, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.